What up, guys? Welcome to the Introvert Dating Success Show, the live edition. I'm your host, as always, Harry Wilmington. How you guys doing today? So I decided to do a live today because I just felt like doing one, and I had a few topics that I wanted to talk about, but I thought there was one topic in particular that I really wanted to cover, and it's this idea of body count in terms of women and what her high body count can signal about her and why it should be considered a huge red flag. Now, you've probably seen other shows like this, and a lot of guys will come in here and say things like, oh, well, because she can't pair bond anymore, or because it's really gross, or won't be able to tell if the kid's mine, and all these other various reasons that I'm not going to get into because those talking points have been bludgeoned to death. But there are four things that I actually want you to consider when you're dealing with a woman that has a high body count. All right. And it has nothing to do in terms of your judgment of her, about her character, or any of those things, because I'll give a big caveat in the beginning, because typically when these kinds of topics are brought up, women will say, well, what about men and high body count? And it's not fair. What about them? Yada, yada, yada. So I don't know who's going to rewind back and see this part of the show, but I'm going to say this for you guys watching. All right. Is that for men that have high body counts, yes, it's different in the sense that we have to build up our worth to be able to have enough women that want us to be able to even get a high body count. Whereas women can just go out there and say, hey, I'm available, and people will just pop up. So I understand that part of it, all right, which is why it's different for women than men. But I will say, even with that, men, you having a high body count is not indicative of you having your stuff together, okay? A lot of times it could be because maybe you were rejected a lot as a kid and you're trying to prove your worth now by trying to equate how many women you can get with how much approval you're getting. And that's not good either. So for the men out there, yes, it's on our end of things, admittedly, it's better for us that we can have a higher body count and not be judged. But for your own self-worth, really see what it is about your situation and why it is that you feel that you need to have such a high number in the first place in order to feel good about yourself. Because I don't think it's good for men either, okay? So I'm getting that out of the way, because ultimately this show is about men. So for women that are watching this, I've said my part about men, but this show is primarily dedicated to talking to men. So I'm going to talk to them now about why it is that a woman having a high body count is a huge red flag. All right. So let's get into the topic. What is it about women having a high body count that's so bad? And I don't want to go into the regular reasons most guys talk about. I want to talk about this from one simplest perspective that's going to allow me to go into four other reasons, okay? And it's this. In my experience, I have found that most women that have a high body count, it's usually due to trauma in their lives. That's the bottom line. It's not trying to judge a woman that maybe she has a little extra testosterone or just really likes to hook up and has been doing it forever. But no, like I said, the majority of women I've either talked to or tried to get into relationships with that had high body counts, usually connected to that was some form of trauma where they were trying to make themselves feel better about life or trying to get acceptance of some kind. And that's what's typically happening. Now, I'm 41. I've had the experience of seeing women that I've known over the years that were at one point promiscuous now be in their 30s and close to 40s and seeing the effects of that. But also, if you look on a global scale, there have been recently some celebrity women that have come out and said that, when they were back in their 20s talking about, free body this, I do what I want. You talk to those women now and they're saying, oh yeah, well, I was saying that back then, but really I just had some trauma I was going through and I didn't really know how to cope with it. And so I was trying to hope that all these bodies on me would make me feel some kind of way. And so I'm going to actually put up on screen here a few examples of what I'm talking about. All right. So let's go to this first one here. It's the stream here. So this is a woman that I actually found on TikTok. And they have this challenge on there where people, it's like a body count challenge where people go A through Z of the people that they hooked up with and put check marks next to it. So like, oh, somebody hooked up with a guy named Ashton. Oh, I put a check mark because I did an A, I did a B, I did a C or whatever like that, right? So this woman did the body count challenge, 23 bodies. But unlike most of the people that did this challenge, here's what she put up next to it. She says, there is nothing that I hate more than the fact that this was my coping mechanism to get through the hard times. The sad thing is there's more, but I don't even remember the rest of their names. Ouch. How sad is that? That she was just, because the names didn't matter. Why didn't the names matter? Because she was trying to use hooking up as a means to be able to deal with whatever she was going with in her past, to where it didn't matter the name of the person. All she matters is whatever this person's name is, this body is going to make me feel better about myself. And then come to find out, it didn't. And then she says to women out there, don't give your body away. Every time you give your body away, you give away a piece of your heart. And when someone comes, that means the world to you. You've given so much away to the point where you can be in love, but there's no passion. It's just comfortable for you, and it's sad. Now, I checked out this woman's page, right? Come to find out, she had trauma growing up. She had anxiety. She had depression. And how was she trying to deal with those issues? By hooking up with a lot of people, right? And so this is what I want you guys to understand, that when you see a woman out there and she's hooking up with all these people, you're thinking, oh man, why did she reject me? I mean, oh my God, I wish I could have gotten a piece of that because she's just being judgmental and yada, yada, yada. And yet you don't know that the reason she might have avoided hooking up with you is because she sees you and realizes you don't have trauma, and she doesn't want to bring on her trauma to you. So she's actually doing you a favor. Because this woman, 23 bodies plus more that she can't even remember, she was going through some major stuff. And had that worked out, you would have now had to be stuck in her trauma. So now I'm going to get on to another person who you guys are very familiar with. Brittany Renner recently came out, and she was on Pearly Things podcast talking about her situation where she was hooking up with a lot of people, and how now that she's hit 30, surprise, surprise, she regrets it. But what is the reason that she was doing it in the first place? Let's hear her out.
Hey, to 20-year-olds, and even to my 20-year-old self, I hate how I allowed myself to just be like used up by men.
So for starters, I like that she's taking responsibility, but notice this. This is the regret that comes. And like I said, women that are in their early 20s or mid 20s, they're not going to tell you this. They're going to say, my body, my choice. I should be able to do what I want to with it. I want to hook up with all these guys and I'm going to do it. But they're not going to tell you the actual trauma behind that decision. But later on, when they're reflecting back, they're going to say things like, oh my gosh, I regret this. I can't believe I did that thing with this guy. How can I be so stupid to give up my body so much? Let's continue on with what she says, though.
And that came from a lack of self-worth. I did not understand my value that I was born with. When I think about my list, it's repulsive because they didn't deserve it. But that was an outcome of me discounting my worth. And it's disgusting. I hate even having that spiritual tie in any type of way. But yeah, I would absolutely change sexually how I move around. And not even necessarily because of like the societal outcome. It's more so from my self-worth.
Like, how it makes you like feel.
Yeah, it doesn't feel good knowing that you gave a sacred part of you to a man that looked at sex with you as taking a piss.
Right. So what you say there, right? Like she had low self-worth. She didn't value herself. And again, you guys are thinking, well, it's sexual liberation. That's totally fine. But the women themselves, again, this isn't about judging them or saying, I don't want a woman with a high body count because she's just so disgusting to her, yada, yada. It really goes back to she's got trauma, and that trauma is going to come into your life and affect it in a major way. And the fact that she's even dealing with, these women are dealing with their trauma by hooking up, and we'll get into that later. But like the fact that they're even doing that is a really bad sign for how she's going to deal with stuff later on in the relationship when bad situations arise, or you two don't agree on something. Is she going to go back to flashing back to her trauma and now trying to cope with that by hooking up with somebody else outside of the relationship? These are things that can happen. Now, here's another interesting point, right? Because I like I said, it's usually based on trauma, right? And a lot of men don't have an idea of what that looks like. Like, what do you mean she's possibly had trauma? Why would she use sex as a coping mechanism? So, and I'm going to show you a short clip of Black China. She had a show where she was confronting her mom about a lot of issues. And again, if you just saw Black China on the street, didn't know who she was, didn't do research like I did, because I didn't really do a deep dive research, you would just think she's hot. I want to bang her. She hooks up with a lot of guys. No harm, no foul. But you're not aware of what was actually going on in her home life and in her family life growing up that caused her to become the promiscuous woman that she now is. So Let's take a look at this short clip.
I'm ready to get the ASAP after this.
5 days.
You put your hand in my face again, girl.
5 days.
You're going to stretch your ass across this motherfucking kitchen. You better keep your motherfucking hands on my face.
5 days.
Don't touch me no more. You do it again, I'm going to rock your world in this mother.
Rock it.
Don't do that. Keep playing with me.
All right, bye.
Do it again, bitch. I'm
Out
going
my house.
Bye, bitch. I'm gone. I hate you. Both your ass.
Woo! Man, that was brutal. Now, I want you to think about this, right? So she grew up in a household where you clearly see her mom was, and I know you're going to say this is all for TV, yada, yada, yada. But look, if I was on TV with my mama, she wouldn't be cussing at me and calling me all kind of MFers and trying to darn near fight me in the house, even if it was for TV. So the reality is that she grew up in an environment where her mom was not showing her a lot of love. They were getting into a lot of fights. She was getting called a lot of names. This is the kind of woman that's going to now go out into the world as a dater and try to seek love and seek attention. And sorry to say, guys, for women, the easiest way to get some form of that feeling is to hook up with a lot of guys, because it's not that they're even just like trying to hook up with a whole lot of guys. They might think, I'm going to hook up with this one guy and it'll be great. So she hooks up with this one guy and then he might start to see that she has some issues and he leaves. So now once she's blaming the guy, oh, men are just all dogs, yada, 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 when really it's just he saw your trauma. But then she goes on to the next guy and the next guy and the next guy and the next guy. And all she's trying to do with all these guys is try to find one that's going to legitimately treat her in a loving, kind way that she wants to be treated. But unfortunately, her trauma that gets in the way. Most guys, if they're smart, don't want to be around trauma long-term. And that's how she ends up collecting more and more bodies. Most women, from a base standpoint, aren't trying to go out there and just give themselves away to the world. So when they are, that should signal to you that there's a huge red flag that's happened in her life in some capacity, all right? Before I get into the full list of that, though, there's one more video I want to show you. This is, now I already went through a couple of celebrity women. This is just a random woman on TikTok that is talking about like the effects and aftermaths of her deciding to go with this whole hookup culture, and more importantly, her describing the reason she was doing it in the first place. Let's take a look.
I used to get out of relationships. I feel that I kind of just distracted myself with another person. Even if I wasn't in a relationship with the other person, I would just kind of be like talking to them, and I would just play dudes left and right, not gonna lie. And in essence, I thought that I was having fun, and I mean, it low-key can be fun, but in the end, in the long run, I was just really hurting myself and hurting my soul and giving my body away to people who did not deserve me.
Now, see, you notice it's interesting how they notice this later on. Like, and this is why, this is a sidebar, right? This is why women are looking for guys who are going to be leaders, because the reality is, as well-meaning as women are, and I think they have the capacity to make some great decisions about their lives. But the problem is, you know, when they have those emotional ebbs and flows, they don't always have the head on straight to make decisions that are going to be the right ones for them to make, that's going to be beneficial to them and their potential future partner and relationships, or right, whatever. So this is why it's wise for you as a guy to start to learn how you can be a legitimately good, well-established leader amongst yourself, amongst your own life, and amongst your family. Because if you're dating a woman, she's looking for that leadership in part because she knows at the times that she's getting all haywire, you got to look after the kids. You got to look after the family's well-being. And it's important, you know, because this is a woman that without that leadership is making these horrible decisions about her life and then regretting it later. And that's where that comes from.
And I just want you to know that hooking up with another person isn't going to provide you happiness. It's not going to provide you peace. It's not going to provide you whatever you are seeking. Only you can heal yourself. Another person will never be able to heal you. Trust me, I've tried. It does not work. So know your worth and don't distract yourself with other people, because in the end, all you're going to do is hurt yourself. Just speaking from experience.
Exactly. So this is just to give you guys some insight into what it is about these women that's actually making them get high body counts. Again, we're not here to judge the women, but it's to give you guys an understanding that when you see a woman that has a high body count, oftentimes there's other things going on in the background that if you're not aware and understanding of how it got to that point, then it's going to be a disaster for you, right? There was a woman I met years ago in Hollywood, and we kind of got to talking, had a good rapport, or whatever. And so she gave me her name, said, hit me up anytime or whatever. And so, we're in the internet age. Before I go out with anybody, I'm doing my due diligence. Even when I did online dating, I would, get the person's name, do a little quick search just to make sure that there's, I remember one time I was trying to go on a date with this woman, and I got her full name and I looked her up, and it turned out she had just had a kid like 2 months prior. Like she was just fresh out the hospital. I was like, why couldn't she just tell me that? Like, but so it's always good to do a search on people, right? So I did a search on her name and kind of find out this woman had all kinds of trauma. I'm talking like she was close to unaliving herself a few times. She had severe depression and anxiety, and she wrote a whole book. And in the book, she's talking about how because she had a traumatic childhood and because she was stressed out and had depression, that she was like the hookup queen in her mid-20s and was just hooking up with all kinds of people, hoping that it was going to heal her. Now, looking at this woman today, you would have no idea that this was anything she would have gone through. But to the point, it's like, why did she go through all that? Because trauma. So with all that said, we're going to get into ultimately the 4 reasons why women with high body count should possess a huge red flag for you. And then we're going to talk about what to do when you find out or get into a situation with a woman that has a high body count, right? So here's the first reason that a woman with a high body count is a huge red flag. As we said this whole show so far, trauma. Most women that have high body counts, again, I'm not trying to generalize, so not all, but a lot of women that have high body counts, it correlates with they had a traumatic childhood and they're trying to rectify that by having a lot of men on them so they can feel some kind of love in some kind of way. Now, unfortunately, they come to usually find out later that going that pathway doesn't actually really make them feel more loved. If anything, it ends up making them, like when they get into their late 30s and 40s, it makes them feel used. It makes them feel abused. It makes them feel like they really didn't have any self-worth. By that time, a lot of women that have had high body counts also end up having kids by some of these random men that they're no longer with. So now they're putting the child through that kind of trauma and having, no father figure around like they probably didn't have and stuff like that. Like it all boils down to there's some level of trauma. And the sad part is most of the women won't tell you what the trauma is about. It could be a plethora of things. I talk to plenty of women now. The amount of traumatic things that unfortunately can happen to women in their lifetime prior to them meeting you is astronomically higher than men's. Like most men's trauma is like, oh, like girls wouldn't talk to me when I was little. And, and to be fair, guys also come from like abusive households and stuff like that. But women overall, like from a young age, they're getting touched inappropriately. They're getting hollered and hooted at. If they're in the household, they're being talked down upon. If their dad left, they're not getting that father figure they need. They're getting all kinds of random abuse from the mother. Or if they have both parents in the home, maybe they're getting touched in weird, odd ways, or they're just going through situation with other relatives and stuff like that. Like there's just a whole list of traumatic things that can happen to a woman that she will not tell you about. And all you'll see is the after effects, which is she's hooking up with a lot of people. But if you are interested in a woman that seems to have a high body count, you need to do your due diligence. You need to really figure this woman out and figure out her story, figure out what's going on with her, what's her family life been like, what's her past been like, because these are the kind of women that if it's because of results of trauma, they're going to bring that trauma into the relationship. The way they react to things, the way that they interact with you on a regular basis is going to reflect that trauma. But you can get a red flag for that and see that early on by knowing what her body count is. The second reason to avoid women with a high body count is because they are not showing that they have proper coping skills. As you said with the last lady, right? When she go through a breakup, the way she would try to combat the feeling of that is by hooking up with a whole bunch of dudes, thinking that it was going to help her. So what that says is that these women that have high body counts, part of it could be they're doing it as a way to try to cope with some kind of injustice they feel in their life or not getting their way or some kind of other thing whereby it's a negative thing that's going on in their life. And rather than deal with that negative thing in a proper way, their response is, I'm going to go hook up. But again, this is bad for when she gets into a relationship with you and you guys have a little tiff going on. What's going to be her response? Is she going to be able to sit there with you and calmly talk to you about what's bugging her, what the situation is that's causing her to feel a certain way? Or is she going to say, well, this guy doesn't get me. So I feel bad right now and I don't know how to talk to him about it. So I'm going to go hook up with somebody else and maybe that'll make me feel better. And then she does it and it doesn't make her feel better. And now she's cheating on you. So now she feels two bad things. So you want to get with a woman that ideally is showing you that she knows how to properly cope with things in life when they're not going her way. A woman that has a high body count is showing you up front that the way she copes with things is by hooking up and not necessarily with the person that she's having a disagreement with, but with somebody else that's going to be her deflecting action until she is able to figure out how to handle you. And that to me is a no bueno situation. The third reason that you as a guy should avoid dating women with high body counts and treat it as a red flag is that that kind of behavior is going to possibly pass on to the children. Like whatever value she has early on in life are going to pass on to the children. Now, some of you guys that are dating in your 20s and 30s, you're not going to see this. Again, I'm 41. I've been around enough women from back in the day that were a little loose. And now fast forward to they're older and they have kids that are also hitting those teenage years. And a lot of the ways in which the mom was is starting to be the way in which the daughter was. So to the point, for example, right? Let's say we go back to example one, the mother went through trauma, right? So that means that her interaction, if you look at the video I showed with Black China, that's the interaction that she had with her mom, was them fighting back and forth, yelling, cursing, and screaming, right? So now she has kids. Can you imagine how Black China is talking to her kids? I can imagine she's probably also yelling and screaming and all that stuff with them, right? So those kind of values get passed on. So you don't think that a mom that was extra promiscuous or didn't have proper coping skills and cope with it by hooking up with other people isn't going to get pass that on to her potential daughter that she has with you? Like, these are things that if she's not being able to handle herself and get that situated to where she gets past that trauma, then it's like, I don't think parents often realize that their kids are watching them. And so she's going to start hearing stories about mommy and how she was really loose back in the day and how, oh, it was just freedom of expression and did what she wanted to do. Well, your daughter could now end up being that same exact way. The question is, do you want that to happen? Because that's going to be an influence. Now, there's going to be people that say, but Harry, but what if the dad was promiscuous in his younger days and blah, 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 blah. Again, this isn't trying to say it's good for men to do either, but it is saying that women typically have an influence on women, and the first women that your daughter's going to see is her mom. Do you want that to be the influence that she has on your potential young daughter? Just things to think about. And then the fourth reason to potentially avoid women with a high body count and see it as a red flag is self-sabotage. You saw the girl, like I said, the girl you saw, the last one, you saw Brittany Renner talking about how like they thought that it was a good idea to try to get over their trauma by trying to hook up with a whole lot of people. And then they found out it didn't work. But all that hooking up did was self-sabotage them. It self-sabotaged their emotions. It self-sabotaged their ability to really connect with somebody. As you saw with the picture that I showed earlier, where the girl was talking about how, you know, she can try to love later on, but it just gets harder to do and you have less compassion. Like, these are women saying this. This isn't me, Harry, coming on here and saying, as a guy, I think women, blah, 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 blah. These are women that are showing you and telling you that they were actually doing things to self-sabotage themselves that they recognize in hindsight. But you don't want to get a woman that's going to recognize in 15 years from now, oh, all the stuff I was doing with you back in the day, I was just self-sabotaging myself. Like, no, you want a woman ideally right now that is like, I already recognize that this is probably not the best thing to do and that I need to figure out alternative ways to deal with life's hardships, because as Kevin used to always say, like, the world does not owe you understanding. I love that quote. It's a very great quote because it's true. It's like, you want to get with a woman ideally that has less trauma or has done the things she needs to do to actively get through that trauma, to not bring it so heavily into the relationship. All right. Now, with all that said, let's say you meet a woman and you're dating her and you haven't had the, high body count talk. Cause to be fair on this show, I've talked about how, like, I don't typically ask women about their body counts of the past. Not that I don't think it's that important, but it's like, I understand that sometimes you need to really observe a person before you get into how the number of bodies they had in the past is going to determine where they're at now. And the reality is, as much as I've talked about the trauma and stuff like that, the reality is there are women out there that have had high body counts that have done the work on themselves to realize that wasn't the right way to do things, and have changed up and have been actively showing for several years that they don't operate in that old way of thinking. Those are the kind of women where if they had a high body count, I could be a little judgmental early on, but be like, okay, but let's take time to actually date and see where this goes. Let me see, how it is when we fight and yada, yada, yada. So to that, I say this. Let's say you meet a woman and you find out, say 3 months in, oh, she had like whatever you consider to be a high body count. I know that's a very controversial thing. Some guys think like, oh, it's like 5 bodies and I'm out. And some guys are like, she had 100 bodies, but she's experienced. So it really depends on how you're going to feel about that. But let's say for the argument's sake, you find out she has a high body count that you are not cool with. All right. Here's the thing that you do. If you really feel like this could really be a thing, you think that she's like your perfect match and the chemistry's there, but you're worried about this body count thing. This is why it's good for you to take your time in dating, because it's not so much about the body count as it relates to, what that body count is saying about the trauma she's had in the past and her ability to have gotten over it. So if she has a high body count, first you want to figure out, really figure out her family backstory, figure out what she went through as a kid, if anybody did anything to her that caused her to want to rack up this high body count. Maybe she's just sexually free and really is just like, I just have a slightly higher testosterone level and want to bang everything moving, and I wasn't caring about relationships back in the day, yada, yada, yada. Again, these aren't good things, but you want to get the full story. So let's say she says, oh yeah, I realized I had a traumatic past and stuff like that, and the family this and that, and I don't really, whatever. Okay, find out that story, okay? From there, figure out what has she done since that story to better herself. Has she been in therapy? Maybe she found out she was bipolar and she got on some type of, drug regimen to where she can regulate herself and not be so radically free. Maybe she was able to, meet up with whoever did stuff with her in the past and have a reconciliation to where she felt better. But figure out what she's done about those traumas to get past those traumas, and then ask about the actual work she's been doing since then to make sure she doesn't relapse back into that kind of behavior that you were finding not acceptable. All right. And then from there, again, when you take your time dating and you move slowly versus trying to rush into stuff, you'll be able to catch these things early on, but then really see how she is in various high pressure situations, meeting your family, getting into your guys' first few arguments, which is inevitably going to happen. When those things happen, see how she reacts to them. See if she's, keeping messages on her phone. See if she's like keeping Instagrams where she's letting a lot of dudes like her stuff, and see how she's presenting herself on social media. Is she the woman that's always posing in bikinis and wearing skimpy outfits to try to get likes from men? I got news for you. That is just as bad as her having a high body count, because she's trying to vie for attention outside of a relationship that she doesn't actually need. All right. So you look at all these things collectively and say, based on the trauma that I know about, based on the work that she says she's doing, based on how she's presenting herself today, based on, what other men she has in her life and how she's trying to connect with them or not connect with them based on her social media, even if she has a high body count, do these other things that she has going on allow me to want to continue to stay with her, or are continuing to be red flags that indicate outside of the high body count, she's ultimately not a good mate? Because I don't want to come in here and say women that have high body counts are all bad. I don't think inactively that's true any more than I don't think that guys that have all these high body counts are great or bad either. It's just sometimes situations happen in life, but those actions can be very indicative of the kind of behavior she could bring into a relationship. And I don't want you to get trapped by a woman that had a high body count, which was indicative of traumas, which was indicative of not having coping skills, which is indicative of having certain values that you don't want to pass on to your children, and that are indicative of her being the kind of woman that's going to try to self-sabotage her life, which is then going to affect you. All right, guys? So hopefully this gives you guys some clarity. Again, I didn't want to go into the whole like, oh, pair bonding and blah, 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 because those have been dead. Those have been spoken to death. But I do think it's important to look at the reasons behind why a person is making certain decisions, high body count being one of those in women. All right. So thank you guys for listening to that portion of the show. I will now answer any questions that are in the chat. We do have a question, so I will answer this question. If you guys have any other questions, then feel free to leave it down there. Also, if you like this content, give me a like, give me a subscribe, send some super chats if you want. I appreciate all the support you guys are showing me. All right. So let's get into this guy's question. He says, do you stop texting when she needs space after texting all the time? She just broke up with the boyfriend after we were getting closer and doesn't want to jump in yet, but we've talked about the future. All right, so let's get into it. A lot of mistakes being made here. To start off with, texting kills attraction. You should only be texting a woman to get a date. And even then, I still recommend phone calls, but I get it. We're in the texting age, so it is what it is. But the goal is not to be texting a woman nonstop. I've done several shows. Go back in my log and just look at all the shows I've done on texting. I've done shows about what women say about texting. The majority of women are usually busy outside of seeing you. So when you're not in front of their face, they don't actually care if you don't text them. But you can use texting as a barometer to tell when she's starting to like you more. But yeah, dude, you shouldn't be texting her all the time at all. So this part about when she needs space after texting all the time, if she's saying that she needs space because you're texting her too much, it's because of just that. Because you got to think about this. In the beginning of dating, you want to make yourself limitedly available. And that is when dates happen. So you go on a date, she sees you for 1 to 2 hours, has a great time, and then goes the freak home and doesn't have to see you. And she needs that time to not see you to start building up attraction. But when you text her nonstop, it's like you're in front of her face all the time. And she has not yet decided if she wants you in her life that much. So it's almost like you're forcing her to make you be in her life all the time. And that's not something that most women want. So you keep your texting to, you ask her on a date, take her out, show her a good time, leave her alone for a few days, and then repeat. It's really that simple. And a lot of guys get caught up on this thing of I have to text so much because yada, 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 but that's not really the case. Breaking up with the boyfriend, so she was jumping. Yeah. So if she just broke up with her boyfriend, honestly, whether she broke up with a boyfriend or whether you're meeting this woman that's brand new for the first time, most women are going to need 2 to 3 months to solidify their feelings for you. So yeah, what you don't want to do is make the mistake of rushing in too soon and being like, hey, you just broke up with your boyfriend. Oh, that's so sad. Date me now. No, the first 3 months should just be you taking her out, showing her a great time, having some occasional hookups, and repeat. There's no talk about being in a relationship. There's no talk about what are we. There's no talk about having a future together. In fact, future speak is like the worst thing you could be doing, especially for a woman that just got out of a relationship with a guy she saw a future with. Like, you as the guy should never be bringing up future stuff. You leave that for the woman to do. And even if she says, hey, I can see us doing blah, 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 you say, okay, that's great. But for now, let's just focus on now. Like your focus should be in the now. Your conversation with her should always be about stuff you're doing in the now. Let her bring up the future. When she brings up the future, it's a great indicator that she sees stuff going somewhere, but you don't fall for the trap and get into that conversation about the future with her, because that is the easiest way to make her feel like this is now moving too fast and wanted to jump out. Continuing, you said she's not said it directly. Her friend said she needs space after splitting up with him. I just chose to tone it down as I'm going to see her around every couple of weeks anyway. Yeah, that's great. So yeah, and that's another thing too. Here's the thing. Her friends will be your greatest downfall. Women's friends mean well, but especially if they're single girlfriends, most women, just to be honest, most single women keep other women single. So you need to not be going to her friends. You should be dealing with her on a direct to direct basis. Don't let her friends get into your head about, oh, well, she said this thing about you. Oh, blah, 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 blah. Like, ignore them completely. Like, all you want to worry about is your interactions with her this early on in the dating process, because her friends are not going to be with you guys on the dates. They're not going to be in the conversations you two are having together. And so do not let them get in your ear and talk to you about this woman. I'm telling you, I've seen too many situations where I've been in situations where I thought I had a good thing with the woman, and then I start listening to the friends and I start acting differently. And now she doesn't like the way I'm acting because I'm acting differently than the way that I was when I first met her, and I'm out. All right. So focus on one-on-one. If you guys are in the same friend circle, that's great. You shouldn't be going to them talking about anything about your feelings for this girl, about what you want to say to her, about, hey, can you figure out, can you get a good read on if she feels a certain way, or blah, 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 blah. Like, leave her friends the freak out of your guys' potential relationship. That's all I got to say. So yeah, that's all I got today, guys. So appreciate you guys. I'll do I'm going to be doing probably a longer show at some point before I got out of town. I'm going to be going out of town on Tuesday. Going back east, visit the family for a little bit. So I'm going to pre-record some shows before I go. And hopefully I'll get to do a live with Miss Chelsea before I go out of town. If not, then we'll do one when we get after, because we got a great topic that I want to talk about on a live show, potentially with her. If you guys haven't checked out Chelsea's live line, please check out her stuff. She has a great show that I've been a guest on. I've done a couple of her shows now, so you can go over there, if nothing else, to watch the shows that I've been on with her. But she has some great material for you guys out there. All right. But anyway, guys, thank you so much for watching this broadcast. Be sure to like the show. Like I said, be sure to subscribe to it. And if you guys have any questions you want me to answer on future shows, leave it down in the comments. I'll be more than happy to answer those on a potential later show. All right. Thanks, guys, for watching. I'm Harry Wilmington, and I'll catch you guys on the next one. I'm out. Peace.
Thanks for listening to the Introvert Dating Success Podcast. Visit us at introvertdatingsuccess.com for more great tips on attracting women using your natural introvert charm. Oh, yeah.